Hello and welcome to WD18, the Watford fan channel, for a special video. Val-Ball 2.0 brought to you by the Mad Squirrel, the forward-thinking brewery with the best beer in Hertfordshire. Super cool venue in Watford, 7 minutes from Vicarage Road. Great vibes, amazing drinks, food's top drawer, as me and Charlie have already found out. But please drink responsibly, and obviously 18s over applies as well. Today we're going to be talking about Val-Ball 2.0 with none other than Mr Charlie Zazera and Jordan Watford Analytics. Jordan, mate, what a pleasure to have you on today. First off, how are you feeling? How's life? Feeling content with Watford at the moment?
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I mean, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because in some ways, yeah, but then when you look at the table, obviously it's not ideal. So it's a tough one to really pinpoint. We're still pretty early on, of course, so there's lots of room for feelings either way. But I think on the whole, I'm pretty content. But as I said, room for improvement, and I'm sure we'll get into that today.
Absolutely. Charlie, hey, I think content's the word, isn't it? Because we are 18th in the league. We've won one, come off the back of that 3-3 draw away at Coventry, drawn 2 and lost 2 so far under Val. But would you say there's been more to kind of dissect than just the results of Val-Ball? And I'm sure obviously we'll talk about it today, but it feels like it's not telling the whole story of how we played.
Yeah, I've been happy, to be honest, just because last couple of seasons has been absolute dire, and I feel like we finally got a bit of an identity, the start of one, which we're going to talk about today. We're seeing exciting football. We can tell it's not the finished article yet, but I think there's really promising signs. I know there's a lot of fans who look at the table and aren't happy with it, but I think considering the amount of players that left the club, we've had a few come in, not as many as we'd hoped for, but I think there's some early signs, and hopefully we can start getting the results that I think the performances have deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we do get into Val-Ball 2.0, this video has obviously been pre-recorded, but we'll be going live on Thursday evening. So feel free to get in the comments, ask any questions, and we'll be in hand to answer. You can obviously follow the guys and myself on Twitter. Our ats are in the link in the description. Obviously follow WD18 at WD18 fans. Before we also do get into it, huge shout out to Watford women after the first win of the season versus Charlton at the Valley. Sam will be back for the second episode of our new Watford Women's show very, very soon. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled for that one. Jordan, we're going to take it right back to the start with Val. Not that long, really. But in terms of sort of the expectation you had coming in, has it been different to what you did expect from the sort of style of play point of view?
Yeah, I think it has, actually. I think when he first came in, obviously we're all going back and looking at kind of what he's brought to the table previously. I think most people are going to be looking at Barnsley in a lot of ways just because that was his most positive spell, and trying to see what he might be bringing to Vicarage Road, and then obviously factoring in West Brom too, just to kind of see that championship kind of crossover. But it is different. I think we kind of expected a little bit more kind of gung-ho, a little bit going forward, a little bit quicker, not so much patience and retention of the ball. We've definitely seen a lot more of that in terms of using the ball, slowing things down and kind of taking our time in possession rather than that two-touch straightforward football we saw at Barnsley. So it has been different, which I think is a positive overall. He has adapted because there were some criticisms of that style of play at West Brom. I think it kind of came undone a little bit at times there. There's been some difference to what we expected, and I think that's probably for the best, actually.
I think this is the thing that Jordan mentioned, Charlie, about sort of the expectation of Val, because you spoke to both a Barnsley fan and a West Brom fan, and the consensus towards Val was very differing. I mean, the fact we had to do a second video to kind of see the other point of view probably says it all. But just talk us through what people didn't see about the expectation from your point of view after speaking to those two fans.
Yeah, it was interesting. We got a Barnsley fan on and then a West Brom fan, hoping that the Barnsley fan would be quite glowing of Val-Ball. But they were both quite negative to start with. They said how direct hoofball it was. We're expecting the high pressing, but they were kind of moaning about it and said that they didn't enjoy it at all. So I was kind of worried going into it, what we were going to see against QPR. But I've got to say that QPR game, that first half, I thought I was hallucinating or something. What I was seeing in terms of, we got a glimpse of it against Crystal Palace in the pre-season when we saw James Morris like inverting, and he was doing that a lot against QPR, and just kind of movement midfield rotations, 1v1s like Martin's running at his defenders. That first half against QPR was just a complete shock to me, which is kind of why we wanted to do this video, because it's something different than what we expected. Really different, in my opinion, and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of the point of this video today. So we're going to kind of break it down from what we've seen so far. So Charlie, first the pitch graphic that we're going to be talking about. So Jordan, if you could maybe talk us through sort of the in possession stuff once we get the graphic up. So effectively what we've seen from Val so far in terms of tactically. If we just get it up here. So yeah, Jordan, take it away. In possession, from what you've seen so far, what can we say about this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's quite a fluid formation in a lot of ways. It changes as you kind of work through the phases a lot. It really depends what situation you're getting the ball in. And I think that's the important thing with this sort of style of play too, because you are, off the ball, which we'll get into. You are pressing a lot. You're winning the ball back high up. You're not always going to be retaining that possession within the same areas. You're not always picking it up in your own half and starting from there. So it can be quite, adjustable, and there is some improvisation required too from the players. But in terms of that base structure, that base setup, you are essentially looking at kind of what the ideal shape is. But as you move through those phases, it's going to change. We're seeing a lot of build up from the back. That's kind of the cornerstone of this team right now. Is you're starting with the goalkeeper. We're not afraid to play through the centre backs. Those two are going to be getting a lot of touches of the ball, the most on the pitch. And then the way you're kind of seeing it adapt from there, even across these opening 5 games, we've had quite a good sample size of different types of style of play we're coming up against. We do change it a little bit, but the main philosophy once you get the ball in that back 4 is just find the centre backs, and then you're looking at that 6 as that kind of that option just to kind of recycle the ball. If depending on his movement, depending on how the opponents shut him down, close off space, you're going to try and find him. You're going to try and play through him, and that can change. But once he gets the ball, it's up to the 2 fullbacks, the centre backs, the 2 8s just ahead of him there to try and find a way to get in possession and get control. You need a lot of movement from those players. They need to understand their roles, but they've also got to be able to take it on to themselves to find the space to work in. And I think, if we had to say one thing that would be the crucial point in that team right now, it is that number 6, because he really does change the shape of the team. We talked about inverted fullbacks quite a lot this season, and that is also somewhat dependent on him. If he's in a lot of pressure, that's when you're asking those guys to come in and help and start creating overloads and finding space. We've tried previously under different head coaches to play out from the back, and there's sometimes been some technical limitation, I think, with some of the players we've had, but there's also just been tactical limitations, because if you've only got one option or 2 options and it gets shut down, then it's so hard to beat, and it's not something we've historically been good at. But what I would say is currently we are being put into a position where we can play out from the back. It's just up to the players to do so. And in Hoot and Porteous so far, they've done a pretty good job there. We've taken some risks. Backman's taken some risks as well. He's almost operating as a third centre back in possession at times. You got to be quite bold with that, and it does come with that risk. But we're starting to see kind of that beginning of something which could be quite good and useful for us, especially in the forward phases too. As we progress up the pitch, that's the real question. How you use those 8s, those 2 midfielders in front of the 6. They are that transition between attack and defense, and then you start to see that quite aggressive attacking shape that we can find ourselves in. We're quite dominant in the final third in terms of having that possession and using it. But it's been a much different setup to what we've seen previously, and as we touched on earlier, what we've expected coming into this one as well. It's been interesting to try and see what direction we're going in.
Sure. One thing I wanted to pick up on there, Jordan, was just you mentioned the importance of the number 6 in this sort of in possession formation. So we've obviously had 3 options so far this season. We've had Ciaralto, who's been converted into that 6 role. Livermore, who's more of a traditional number 6, and then Kiembe, who's kind of been shoehorned from his time from Belgium, where he was a number 10. He's been brought back to a number 6 under Ranieri and in that season, and then obviously under a few different managers. A couple of questions. Number 1, what attributes do you need to have to play this role? And number 2, out of the 3 options we have, who do you think is best suited to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting role. We kind of describe it as a 6 just because of where he's positioned on the field, but it's almost something different. I think in terms of the attributes, because Ciaralto's in there, you kind of might be thinking, oh, okay, the main priority of this position, this player, is to be defensively solid. We've seen him drop into that back three at times as well. But I think the most important thing is actually just to have tempo in possession. You look at the difference between someone like Kayembe and Sirialta. When the ball goes into Sirialta, he is a centre-back, so you might not expect him to be the best in the ball, but he does move quite quickly. He's happy to lay it off first time, take a touch, get out of his feet, keep moving. Nothing simple, nothing expansive necessarily, but that pace of possession, you have to be quick there. We saw Kayembe play a couple of weeks ago, and it looked very different. And the big difference for me was how many touches were being taken. Kayembe receiving the ball 1, 2, 3 touches, and you lose that speed and you lose that momentum, and it breaks down quite quickly. So I think that's really the most important thing. It does help that you've got the kind of defensive awareness that Sirialta brings. He's happy to drop in and fill that space. And we've seen against Coventry away, there were moments where we were quite exposed with the back to the two centre backs, but you need that third guy in there to be able to drop in and help out, and that is important. So it's kind of a role that I think we're still fleshing out a little bit. In terms of any other positions on the pitch that we've seen kind of introduced from Val, this is kind of the one where it feels like it's got the most kind of personality of the players. There's more freedom to change that role as it progresses, and right now it does feel like it's Sirialta's. There's not too many that offer the same things. Livermore, you touched on there. He is more of a traditional 6 in terms of being that defensive midfielder, but again, doesn't quite have the attributes to play it in the same way. So that's one of the things that we've maybe felt a little bit frustrated about, or not too sure about in regards to squad depth. If Sirialta goes out, you've got players that can play in that position, but they offer you something very different. And when it's such an important role to the team, it's a tough one to deal with.
Charlie just touched on Sierralta there. I mean, you've labelled him the Chilean Pirlo. I mean, his development so far has been fascinating to watch, actually. One of the few players where I can remember where I've really been interested to watch him every time just to see how he's developed into that role. I think we've mentioned quite a few times that we didn't expect him to be in that role. And I think it was kind of an accident that he's managed to find himself there. But are you on sort of with Jordan in the sense that actually he gives us that best option in that system, even though it probably wasn't expected that he'd be playing there?
Absolutely. I was at the fans forum and asked Val that question about Sirialta and how we came up with this system. And it was kind of by accident, like he said. He tried it out in pre-season and Sirialta just rose to the occasion and was great for it. I'm really fascinated by this position. I can't remember who called it a full 6. It might have been Jordan on Watford Buzz podcast or someone else, but it's something that I haven't really seen before. I should have done a bit more research to see if anyone's done it. I feel like Mascherano might have done it for Barcelona back in the day, going from that midfielder back to a centre-half. But like Jordan said, I think it is such a key position for what Val's trying to do. And I think you can just tell how key it is because of the drop-off compared to where Livermore played there against Stoke. He just seemed a bit off the pace and couldn't get to the ball and couldn't make those short passes to keep it ticking. And Kayembe just wasn't dynamic enough. So I was surprised that Sirialta was playing there. He'd done his defensive work really well, which we're going to talk about out of possession. But he's been tidying the ball. We saw him get an assist against QPR, turning into a false 9, crossing it for Bayo's goal. So
the first assist of his career.
Surely. It's got to be. But yeah, it's still nice to see him crunching into headers as we go. But another thing that Jordan mentioned, which I wanted to touch on, was the inverted fullbacks that we've kind of been seeing. I'll bring a graphic up in terms of what our system turns into a bit. But Jordan, what have you made of that, seeing James Morris and Ryan Andrews go in there and Ngakia against QPR as well? And what do you think the benefits are of playing this inverted fullback?
Yeah, it's been interesting. We've definitely used them kind of more or less depending on the opponent so far. I think QPR was the kind of most obvious version of that, where both fullbacks were operating quite heavy that way, especially in Ngakia in that first game. Morris started really well there too against QPR, and it's a really useful tool. As you got on the graphic there, it does allow you some freedom of movement. Obviously, it can change quite a bit. That's just kind of one variation, but even just having the option there to drop in that fullback, come inside and almost create, you can have one playing wide, one can come in, and then suddenly you're kind of playing with almost 2 defensive midfielders that can use that possession. They can play the ball around. It gives you more options in the build-up and makes it hard because, the opponent has to make a decision then defensively, where do they cover? What do they do to stop that overload? And you take some risk. Turnovers are a problem if you do lose possession there, but that's where you kind of rely on the intelligence of the players around to kind of make those bets and make those gambles at the right time. But in possession, it's invaluable because we're a team that, again, I'd say traditionally we've always struggled with breaking opponents down that sit back deep and try and stop us. We're not, whilst we've been at the top end of the table in the Championship before, we've never quite been able to get over that hill of grinding teams down and finding ways through. And this is an avenue we can go down to retain the ball, but also start attacks. And yeah, it's really important, but you obviously have to have the right skill set of the players in those positions. And I think I was a little bit surprised that Ngakia played to the level he did in that first game. I thought that was arguably his best game he's had for us. And it's good to see some development on Morris too. He looked quite comfortable there, and that use of the left foot was really important. So it's a good tool to use. It's not something that I feel like we have to rely on. As I said, we've seen it change depending on the opponent. Sometimes we want that width, but it is something that provides underlapping runs too. We've got some really strong players in those wide areas, especially Martins this season. So if you have them supported in the right way, it just gives you different ways to attack teams, and that's something that we've sometimes lacked. So yeah, it's obviously a trend in football right now to kind of look at that inverted fullback as a tool to kind of create overloads. But I think copying trends and kind of being in that way of thinking is not a bad idea, especially as football moves on and you have different options at your disposal. So it's good to see, and again, just another point to Ismaël there, that he is able to adapt and incorporate new ideas into his game, because that was something he was criticised about in previous jobs. So to see that we are potentially developing kind of on and off the pitch is promising.
Yeah, for sure. Charlie, I just wanted to touch on Martins there, because Jordan just mentioned him and sort of his role to play. I know you've got a graphic to put up, sort of his role, but it seems like he's really suited to the way that Val wants to play in terms of coming off the left and cutting inside. I mean, who did we play when he hit the bar? I've completely gone blank. Blackburn, when he kind of reincarnated into Roberto Pereira and did about 3 or 4 times cutting into the right-hand side. Just wanted to touch on him there and sort of the role he can play this season.
Yeah, I brought up this graphic, and this is one against Plymouth. And I was just looking at the early games and kind of the use of the inverted fullbacks. And I was thinking, why are we doing it? What's the point of it? And you can see the player who's showing for the ball on the left is James Morris, and to the right of him, Sir Alter. And I think by James Morris picking up that position, he's creating a passing lane for Martins really deep. So Martins is kind of on the byline, and we've seen that in quite a few games now where he'll receive it. Morris will start off inverted, and then Morris will actually get on the overlap and get a crossing. We saw that a couple of times as well. I think that Val might have identified Martins as one of our key players this year. The way he's trying to facilitate him in the team and get him the ball as much as possible. Obviously, that Blackburn game, he tried that finish about 8 times and it didn't come off. But at Coventry, he did, and it came off beautifully. And he's looked like a new player under Ismaël. So I found it quite interesting, the role of James Morris here. And I was looking at all the touch stats, and I was thinking, is James Morris having loads of touches in the middle? Is Sir Alter having loads of touches? But they're not really. So I think they might be used as kind of decoys and creating space for other people. And that QPR game, I was thinking, compare Ngakia and Morris's touches to see who got involved more, because I just thought it was Morris after looking at the clips. But it's actually Ngakia. So I don't know if we're seeing kind of maybe the left back being inverted, trying to create space for Martins on the left, and then actually more space on the right, because Ngakia was unbelievable against QPR, got loads of crosses in, loads of shots. And then when you look at stats like progressive carries and shots, Ryan Andrews is really high up in those. And are we looking at Ryan Andrews' attacking ability and trying to get him space that way? So yeah, really, really interesting to see how we're using those, how they've been effective. Jordan's probably got a better take on that. But Jordan, I don't know what you think of kind of that, observation of how we're using Martins and maybe the right back getting more advanced than the left back.
Yeah, I think a big part of that too is the trust that the coach has in Wesley Hoot's left foot. I think when you do drop Morris into that central mid position effectively and allow him to come inside, you're opening that distance between Hoot and Martins, but you kind of trust Hoot's left foot to find him. That game against QPR, quite a few occasions where Martin's coming short, turning and going, and Hoot's clipping it in. He can play it quite comfortably with pace down that left-hand side, but there is definitely, we are definitely going down the line of thinking of, okay, if Hoot's got that ball, we've got an opportunity on that right-hand side as well. We know he likes to hit that ball across the opposite corner, and that's something we've worked on quite well from a fullback perspective, is getting forward and capitalizing on that. He's not been able to do it in every single game we've played, but the home games especially, where we've had a little bit more space there, he's found that quite consistently. So I think that's I wouldn't even say it's necessarily always has to be predetermined necessarily, but as the game goes on and you start to kind of find those spaces, it does kind of you do find yourself sitting in that position, because Hoot's going to have a lot of the ball. Morris is also able to come in and play quite comfortably with his left foot, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes if we do have a positional change at left back, to see someone that's maybe kind of operates in a different way at left back if we still kind of go down that route. But it's one right now which is working, especially with the ability of Andrews to drive forward and be a threat offensively from the right hand side too. So there's lots of options, and I think the important thing is we're not too stuck to any particular one. It's just currently, if we have enjoy with it, then keep going. And I think early on, that does seem to be an area that we're having some kind of positive results from.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to flip it and look at out of possession now. And that's one thing that Ishmael said in pre-season, that he actually spent more time with the players working on what was happening out of possession than in possession. So Charlie, if we could get the pitch graphic up and sort of how Val's looking to press teams and looking to set up. And I'll leave it to you, mate, to talk us through it, because it feels like, the intensity in which we're looking to press that is quite important. And it seems like it needs quite a lot of buy-in from the players in order to play that way. I think if one person doesn't really buy into that, then there are going to be gaps and you're going to be left open. So if you want to talk through what you've seen so far, how Val's trying to do it, and who's excelled in this part of the game.
Before we get on to the pressing, shape-wise, we've seen, and we talked about the number 6 and Sierrata's role dropping between the centre-backs, and you're kind of creating a 5-2-3, essentially, when we're defending. I do think we've seen this a bit more earlier on, definitely the QPR game, definitely the Stevenage game, and sometimes it's kind of, we've gone away from it, especially if we're losing, in my opinion. But we can see the shape there. And in terms of the pressing, I've just been really impressed with the pressing. Something that I haven't seen at Vicarage Road in a while. I think maybe I can't even remember. I think Javi was quite sit back, and I think we had like a bit of a mid block when Javi was there. I think Zola might have had a bit more of a press, but
maybe Silva.
Possibly Silva. I can't remember too far back, but I've just been really impressed with how organised it's been. The minute another team's trying to build out, you could see our front players, our wingers, instantly go towards their man, look around their shoulder, because they know their mate's going to follow up with them. And there just seems like to be a really structured, considered. It doesn't seem like the pressing I was expecting, which is kind of that high intensity, like bam, bam, bam. It does seem a bit more considered and trying to box them in and stuff like that. And I think we've seen a couple. I think the goal is to get a couple of high turnovers where we do win it back in high positions and we get a shot off. We saw a goal against Arsenal in pre-season from Kone where that worked out. And I think we've seen a couple of chances against Blackburn. We had a good one. So, yeah, I've been really impressed with it. I think we've heard that Val is very big on the pressing, like you said, Jacob. It's been said that Val works on the out of possession stuff, and Dean and Omar are working more on the in possession, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I think out of possession would be quite good. But Jordan's got some stats to back that up, hopefully, or maybe not back that up. But Jordan, what do you reckon of the pressing so far this season?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. It's been good. It's we've been a team that's dominated the ball, as we touched on, in possession, and part of that is down to obviously comfort and control in possession, but also how quickly we're winning it back. We are able to suffocate teams quite a lot, and the Coventry game was chaotic, but we were able to disrupt them quite a lot in terms of numbers. There are some good pressing metrics to look at. Passes per defensive action, we're ranked third in the league. So we a high amount of kind of defensive phases that are going through the opposition's build up disruption. We're second. Pressing intensity, pressing intensity and efficiency, we're sixth for both those metrics in the league as well. So, we are on the high end, and that's also in conjunction with top end numbers in terms of in possession offensive work as well. So, combining those two, it's spelling out quite a proficient team. Pressing is again, it's a useful tool defensively, but it's also an offensive tool as well, right? We're looking to win that ball back, to stop the opponents building up and getting chances in our goal, which we've limited massively because of that style of play. But also, when you are turning over, you're in attacking positions, and we're able to be there quite quickly because we have got the ability to transition through defense and attack. Well, we've got players that are capable of playing in both phases, and it's worked out well. It's a good balance, and it's not one you get to see. Not when you get to see a team that's able to do both as well as we have been able to. And it's a little bit frustrating, obviously, because the league table might not suggest that we're doing it well, but we actually are in a lot of ways. So, yeah, pressing's been really useful and really good to see. And it's something which I think has been in some ways needed at Vicarage Road for quite a while. I think where fans have come a little bit dismayed of some of the football, and you talked about going through their previous head coaches, but we've been quite a passive team defensively for a number of years, and there's nothing really more frustrating than seeing that sort of team concede goals, because it feels very kind of, again, passive. You're not being proactive, and when you see a team that is being on the front foot and being aggressive off the ball, it's really good to watch. And I think so far we've done a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Charlie, just there was one graphic I wanted to show about sort of the out of possession against QPR, because you said there was a few games where, there's a few games where I felt like we've kind of dipped in and out of it. I think Jordan mentioned it just there about Coventry being quite a chaotic approach, whereas QPR, I think particularly that first half, everyone sort of knew their roles, and that was reflected obviously in terms of the start we made. But just talk us through here sort of what we're looking at and how's Val's trying to implement this out of possession shape.
Yeah, just a quick one on the pressing. Graham Taylor was a really early advocate for pressing. I think he was a bit more direct, but he used to kind of get into his players. I know Nigel Gibbs has talked about that before. So, like Jordan said, it's what the Vicarage Road fans enjoy, and that's what we want really. But in terms of the shape and like a little screen grab here, you could just see there when we're defending, you can see Sierralta's dropped in to make that 5, and it's a lot more kind of. It feels a lot more hard to get through. We're going to talk about the positives and negatives, and sometimes this season we've been a bit on turnover. We've been open, and it seems maybe a bit too expansive. But this is a screen grab. I think this is a good example on game state when you're winning and you're protecting the lead. This is what the shape can look like, which is pretty hard to get through.
Yeah, for sure. I think also it gives us that extra support, doesn't it, in the back three? And it also kind of supports the argument that Sierralta is probably the best in that position, the fact that he can just drop into that 3 at the back if needed. So we've talked in possession, we've talked out of possession. Now we're going to go through some of the position profiles, what we expect and need from Val-Ball 2.0. So I'm going to hand it over to Jordan to talk us through the position profile, starting with the goalkeeper, Jordan, and sort of break down what's needed in those positions under Val.
Yeah, I mean, the goalkeepers, obviously, if we're talking about kind of starting possession from the back, which is, in an ideal world, what we'll be doing, that's kind of the plan. Goalkeeper's vital to that. And I think there's been a lot of conversation around Dan Backman, contract extension, captaincy, and so on. But we're getting to see a different dimension to his game, or at least attempting to see a different dimension. It requires a lot more. We're definitely trying to kind of go through that process, and you have to give them credit that we are doing our best to at least put them through kind of consistently, putting them in position. We're not giving up on it. We're going for it. And that shows, and, talk about numbers, that does show in the numbers. We have the lowest percentage of long goalkeeper kicks. We keep it short. We look to build out from the back. And, it does come to the centre-backs too, which obviously we'll get to next. But, your goalkeeper has to operate as an outfield player. They have to, whether or not they're receiving the ball or using the ball, they have to be in position, because they have to try and occupy and be that kind of thing in the back of the mind of the striker when it comes to pressing. He has to be aware there's an option there, and it allows those centre backs to get wide and open up and find other ways to support those inverted fullbacks. It's a chain reaction thing, right? And it all starts there. Obviously, you want the player that's in that position to be comfortable on the ball, be proficient. I think Dan's obviously, he's had some struggles there. It's not been perfect. There's been mistakes, and I think that's going to happen. I don't think it's his forte. It probably won't ever be his main strength. But I think you could still say in terms of risk reward, we've made some mistakes. You can talk about the Wes Hoot goal. That was not Bachmann's fault, but that was an issue with kind of team understanding and just not playing to what we need in those kind of defensive positions in possession. So it's a work in progress. But I think right now, if you look at you kind of go back and look at some of the offensive actions we've had that have started from deep, some of the threats we've had on goal. A lot of the time, it has started from the goalkeeping position, and even if it's as simple as just a pass into Porteous or to Hoot, that's something which can spur on an action that wouldn't take place if you are playing more kind of pragmatically and going long. So it's easy to pick up on the individual errors, but I think you could probably take quite a few. You could concede a few goals this season from it and still be kind of net positive in terms of output.
Sure. That relationship with the centre-back, Jordan, as you mentioned there, in terms of we are expecting Bachmann to probably play a style of play that he's not used to, a style of play that he hasn't played before. I'd imagine he's played a lot of different styles of play since he's been at Watford. Just from your experience in terms of working in football, like how difficult is it for a player to adapt, particularly in Bachmann's case, because he's not used to playing like that before? Do we just have to be patient with him? Do we need to expect him to really implement this style quickly, or is it genuinely just going to be a process that we've just got to be patient and support and go? There might be some mistakes in there, but these things happen if you want to play this style.
I mean, if I'm being like objective on the Bachmann situation, if I'm Ismaël, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe my assessment of Bachmann is wrong, but I don't really see this might be an area that Bachmann can improve on. But I would say, based on the sample size we've had to see, just in terms of his playing career thus far, whilst he hasn't had to do this exact thing as consistently as he is now, I'd say he's probably pretty close to his ceiling and operating in that role. I'm not expecting him to be hugely better at this come the end of the season. I think right now you're thinking that this is the style of play you want. Just because Bachmann has a 5-year contract, there's no guarantee he's going to be our goalkeeper long term or our starter. I think that's a position you can adjust if you need to down the line. I think the most important thing is Ismaël's making the decision of there's going to be some negatives to this, but I still think the positives outweigh that. So you're going to keep going through that cycle even if there are mistakes. I think that he does quite firmly believe we have to start from the back. We have to retain possession. It's important to our game. It's important to keep energy within the players. It's a hard season, especially if you spend a lot of time off the ball. If you're that aggressive off the ball, then you want to minimize the time you have to press and chase that ball down, and that can start right back at the goalkeeper in terms of how often you have to do that. So I think it's something we're going to continue with no matter what. But personally, I think this will be a position that we do recruit for in the next couple of seasons. I don't think Bachmann's probably going to be the guy that's going to be there forever if we continue down this route, that is.
Sure. Charlie, just going back onto that graphic there, I just wanted to ask you, Charlie, about sort of which players particularly suit the system and which players you don't think particularly suit this system. And I think we need to be objective with that because obviously, as Jordan mentioned, I think it's fair to say Bachmann's kind of been shoehorned into that role. I wouldn't say when you look at his attributes as a goalkeeper, he perfectly fits what's required from Val. Just looking at that from what you've seen so far, is there certain players that you feel have suited it and certain players that you feel might need a bit more time?
Yeah, we've talked about Bachmann and building up for the back, which we're doing a lot. And I think, to be honest, Hoot and Porteous have been quite good. The Coventry game might be fresh in fans' memory, which was a bit of a defensive disaster class. But I think leading up to that, we were all saying that defensively was probably our strongest. Just bringing up these stats here about our centre-backs. The one on the left is 4 passes into the final third, and that is the most in the Championship this season. So you see Wesley Hoots on top of that. And then the stats on the right are progressive passes, which you can see Porto's top of that. So I think the 2 centre-backs have been really good this season. I think I was a bit worried about Hoot, about how mobile he was going to be, but I think he's adapted on the whole pretty well. I think his passing's a big asset. And I think Porto's really got the attributes to suit this, especially the kind of, he's got a bit of pace about him. He's really good at last-ditch tackles. He'll probably get sent off once or twice so far this season. But we can see with these two stats here that we're going to build out from the back a lot. And these guys can do it. They're not perfect at all, but the more we play with them, the more the partnership grows. I think that could be a real cornerstone to how we progress. So I'm backing our two centre-backs. I think they've been good this season. Jordan, any other positions that we mentioned, you think players who are suited to what we're doing, or maybe some who aren't?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two you mentioned on there, I think in some ways they're suited to what we're doing in the sense that they're going to have a lot of the ball. They're going to be asked to use it in some different situations. Obviously, Hoot's got that range of passing, but I do think that there is a kind of a tactical consideration to be made with those guys, because they are being asked to do a lot defensively off the ball. Being that last line of defense, how comfortable do you feel with them? That Coventry game is a prime example. The individual errors when they are kind of that last line of defense, when we are playing so high up. We saw both fullbacks right up the top end of the pitch, and quite a lot of the time you're looking at that counter attack, and you're seeing just on the halfway line, Porteous and Hoot. They're there to occupy that striker, and if they don't make that first contact, they don't get that first contact right, which for the most part they've done quite a good job of doing so this season. But if they don't, it's a real risk, and that's when you get backman sucked out. That's when you start to see those issues arise. And because we're playing so high up, because we are being quite dominant in possession, we've managed to avoid teams being in our box too much. I still do have a couple of concerns with some of those players in our box. I think you mentioned being a little bit stiff. I think he is. And I think he can cost you a little bit defensively in your box. If you can keep him out of it, and we can be dominant enough to not have to be sat too deep at times, then I think you could be good. But you're taking a fair amount of defensive risk in this team. And I think that, again, you have to make decisions, and there's a risk reward that we're going for. And I think generally Ismail's quite a bold head coach, and he seems to be comfortable doing so. But I think in terms of overall play, the centre-backs concern me in some ways more than any other position. But it's difficult because it's a contrast, because in possession they can be a real asset in the right situation, but there are some defensive issues there. So if you're talking about players that you could identify as maybe upgrading or changing fit, that's one you've got to look at long term and in those two options, because Hoot has his benefits in possession, as does Porteous, but I'm not 100% convinced just yet. There's still some room there for me to be convinced, I'd say.
Because I saw a tweet from you, Jordan, about sort of feeling more negative about us defensively than offensively. And I think just in terms of what you meant by that, if for people who didn't know, is it just genuinely sort of the out of possession if we do get exposed, in the sense that Porto and Hoot, they do have an individual error in them, or is it sort of collective shape that you mean by that?
There's a collective shape element, I think, but not to undermine what Charlie was saying about their use of the ball, because you're almost looking at them as you're almost looking at them as kind of offensive benefits, right? You're thinking about how do Porteous and Hoot. If you're thinking about Porteous and Hoot as positives, you're thinking about how they affect us in build up, how they affect us in attacking phases of the game, in a sense, right? Defensively is the question. From an overall shape perspective, again, you're taking big risks because you are getting numbers forward. You could adjust that. You could be more conservative. And I think as we play against better teams that are higher up the table, maybe we kind of recalibrate a little bit, and we'll see us be more conservative at times. I think these opening 5 games, they've been opportunities for us to try and dominate, and for the most part we have. So maybe we've kind of been seeing a kind of a skewed sample of what to expect over the course of a 40+ game season. But the individuals, I wouldn't say they're quite cut out for the risk that we take. You might want someone who's a little bit more mobile, able to cover a little bit. One of those centre backs who just has a little bit more speed, a little bit more presence in space than Porteous and Hoot. Porteous has good recovery tackling, and he does get back in there. He does have good commitment. But sometimes you want him to be the other side of the defender. You want him to be able to have that breakaway speed to help and defend those situations, which I don't think we really have right now. But this is also part of what you get with a multi-window kind of change of a squad. You can't get everything perfect. It's the same with the goalkeeper. It's not perfect, but you can probably take the risks, and you're still going to end up on net positive, I'd say. So it's not going to be clean every time. There's going to be games like Coventry where you're going to see some mistakes and be frustrated by it. But that's kind of where we are. And, it's not going to be a squad that has 2 of every position and, perfect balance and harmony. We're in the middle of change right now. And I think all things considered, we're not in a bad position for that. But it's definitely one to keep an eye on. We can talk about not scoring goals and issues there. And I think that was always one that was just on the cusp of changing, and didn't take too many adjustments or even a little bit of luck to kind of switch in our direction. The other end, I think, is we've been riding our luck a little bit at times too. The main defensive kind of positive that we have right now is we're limiting the opponents to having low quality chances, low numbers of shots, and partly that's because of our dominance in possession and our offensive dominance too, rather than quality defending in dangerous areas.
Sure.
I just can't think of. We'll move past the defenders because we've got other positions, but I can't at this level in the Championship. I can't think of many defenders who I would want to be playing with our style, who are quick, dynamic. There's not many Van Dijks, is there, or even Konates, those big, powerful guys. But I think Jordan's points are really, really valid. Let's move on to a position I wanted. We've talked a lot about the 6 and about the fullbacks. Jordan, talk to me a bit about the 2 8s.
Yeah. I mean, these really, I think you could. The thing that's interesting about this system, because it does require so much from every position, you could almost argue for so many of these positions being the most important in the team. I think if you said 8 was the most important, or the 2 8s, you've got a strong argument. They have to fulfill multiple roles in the team. Depending on the opponent, depending on the situation, they are the ones that instigate kind of pressing, also kind of offensive build up. They have that freedom. They're almost. The way they play, they could be 2 number 8s. They kind of having that all-round midfield kind of role where they're, off the ball, working in possession. They've got a good range of passing, but they're also operating as 2 10s at times as well. Getting forward, supporting. They can be your offensive numbers in the box. And when it comes to delivery and kind of getting the ball into the box, whether it's crossing, cutbacks, we're right at the top end of that, of those metrics in terms of creativity, creation. Those 8s being able to support that's crucial. And that's where you're going to see, the goals we've already seen, Tom Delibashiru, Imran Louza, they're getting involved. They are being offensive threats. But, it's all about time and place and situational awareness. It requires a lot of intelligence from the players, not just kind of being able to, be skillful in the right areas and have the ability, but it's also knowing when to apply yourself to those roles, because it's quite a dynamic position. So, if you're having trouble getting through teams, retaining possession, you can look at the 8s to be the ones to bail you out of that, or the ones to blame if it's not working sometimes. And that can go through defensive phases, attacking. It really does fall on them quite a lot. So that's, I think I'd probably say that's our two most important positions to make this team function the way that Ismaël wants it to. And unfortunately, we probably got one of our best players in that position, which helps a lot. So it's a vital one, though.
Yeah, for sure. One position we haven't actually mentioned, we've covered most of them, is the number 9. Milita Rajovic has come in as sort of the man to take over the mantle. Obviously, we've tried with Bio to kind of fit him into the team, and it seems like it's clear he wasn't the right fit for Val, hence why we've gone into the market and got Rajovic for £1 million. Charlie, there was a sort of the number 9 bounce pass we mentioned, the Blackburn game, and sort of the role the number 9 can play in this system. It felt that Val, and he made it pretty clear, sort of the importance of this player into his system, and sort of not only the importance of the player, but actually the profile of the player as well. And it felt like Milita had been picked out as someone who ticks a lot of boxes. Just talk us through the sort of role the number 9 plays and what we can expect, because as soon as he came on, I noticed this. He was dropping quite deep to pick up the ball. Now, there's a part of me which went, I'd prefer him a little bit higher up the pitch, but also it was clear that he had taken on what Val was trying to do pretty quickly. And then even in the commentary game, you felt that he did that a few times, but the difference was he was getting into better areas. So just talk us through that number 9 position and what Milita can offer.
Yeah, I think it's been clear, and what we've been working on pre-season, there's been a trend between both Bio and Rajovic taking on instructions and trying to deliver something. There's something that I noticed, which I call like the number 9 bounce pass, and then we saw our first goal against QPR after 33 seconds Tom Deli Bashiru, where Bayo drops deep, knocks it back to, I think it was Loser, and then you had that third man run with Tom Deli, where Bayo created the space after dropping deep. With Rajovic against Blackburn as well, he drops deep, knocks it to Kayembe, and you can actually see on the shoulder there, Chapvelatzi at the bottom right of your screen. He breaks off the back of the defender, and a better ball in by Kayembe, and Chapvelatski's in. So there's a nice little pattern that we've seen there. I think there's been quite a few different patterns that we've been working on, which is, again, something that I haven't seen in a while. But yeah, it's been interesting. Although Bayo's missed some chances and hasn't got involved as much, I think we can't discredit the Crow too much. He's done okay. He's tried. He just hasn't got what we need, I think. And it's been interesting with Rajovic coming in and doing something that I kind of didn't expect, being that poacher, that kind of 6-yard box goal scorer, scoring 2 goals like that. And that's what we need. And if he can do the hard work, the pressing out of possession, being a bit physical, roughing up the defenders, linking up, bringing our attack in with the 2 8s turning into 10s, and then the wide players, bringing those 4 players into play. The number 9's a really, really key cog to this wheel that we're trying to build. But obviously 2 goals in his first start's not a bad start. But Jordan, what do you think of the signing of Rajovic and what we need for a number 9 in this system?
Yeah, I think he offers you. I think his physicality and presence offers you a different option. Both him and Bayo are they are natural poachers in the box. They like to be kind of in the box on the move, trying to capitalize on delivery into the box. And I think Bayo did a decent job of that. I'd say this game was actually against Coventry. Rahovic's first 2 goals, I think, actually came in the game we were most offensively kind of proficient in those wide areas. I think, Bayo is probably a little bit frustrated he didn't get that delivery from Tom Ince. Don't get me wrong, it's a great finish from the striker. Maybe Bayo couldn't have done that. But, Bayo's movement's been pretty good in the box. He's found space, and his last 2 games prior to the Coventry game, he didn't have a shot in either game. And part of that is finding him. I don't think that, maybe more so of Rajovic, but neither of those 2 strikers are guys that are going to pick up the ball, drive it forward, beat 2 men and shoot. That's just not their game. They want to be, one touch, getting a shot away. They're players that want to operate in the box. Bayo's timing is good. His work rate off the ball is excellent. And we even saw that when he came on against Coventry too. He was able to have an input and help get Rajovic on the score sheet for the second goal. So, there's a time and a place for both of those players. But I think Rajovic gives you that, as I said, that little extra dimension physically. He finds a way to the ball well. He's combative in the box. He's a problem. And, the way he got himself into position for the first goal, I thought was impressive. He's falling down in the build-up. He's getting back up. He's finding that space. And, you combine that with some intelligence and some good timing from Tom Ince, and you've got some productivity, and you've turned around the team that, was creating no opportunities or not good opportunities, just lots of shots, low probability, and suddenly you're scoring them. It's a few little adjustments. And I think, Rajovic is something that we needed, and we're going to benefit from over the course of the season, because we had to have a little bit of an alternative in a position where, we've got Healy that's not being used, but him, Bayo, Rajovic, they're all quite different. So it's good to see.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you haven't already, make sure you go and check out Charlie's video with which was sort of a breakdown on Rajovic and what he can offer to this Watford team. I know it's a short and small sample size so far in a Watford shirt, but if you want to hear what he did before he came to Watford, then make sure you do go and check that out. And it was very interesting, sort of what I was hearing, Charlie, about him being very much a box player. So it's interesting to see how he develops his game under Val. Just wanted to flip it over, Jordan, and go back to, we've looked at kind of the positives and the options with the number 9. One negative, we have to kind of be balanced with this sort of thing, because Val-Ball, isn't the complete package. The one thing I do worry about slightly is, as you mentioned at the top of the show, sort of the turnovers. Could you maybe just talk to us through? And I think the Stoke game was one that, where I was there, I noticed it particularly, where out of possession, we were getting a little bit caught. At times we were playing in the wrong areas of the pitch. Just what's one thing that we need to be aware of as Watford fans, particularly in that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, this is the risk reward that we talk about with Ismaël in general. You're gonna open yourself up to these things, and I think that's where you're relying on that 6 and the centre backs to be your insurance, because you are naturally playing quite high up the pitch offensively. We dominate the ball, but we don't just hold it for possession's sake. We are in the opposition third for significant portions of the game, and that does come with a level of risk, and we see the negatives with that sometimes. That's unfortunately the way it is. I think that game in particular, we need to refine our use of the ball somewhat. We were sloppy in that game. I think this is a style of play that really punishes you if you're going to be sloppy. An off day at this in this system is going to be a real off day. You can't really coast through and kind of go through the motions. You have to get it right, or you really get it wrong. So I think it comes with a level of experience and knowing when to kind of turn it on, turn it off. I don't think we have to be, full all one end or the other every single game. I think you can kind of fluctuate a little bit and be pragmatic at times. The Stoke one was a weird game, but you're right. We got caught out too much, and that will happen. And I think until we get things a little bit more consistent in terms of personnel, we're going to see some mistakes, and I think you just kind of have to accept that. But yeah, you just got to be more careful with your turnovers, and you could also look at timing of press. I think the first half in that game, we weren't really quite on it with the pressing. We were kind of engaging a little bit too late, and we were getting played through too often. If you're gonna step out and make that press early, you really got to make sure the whole team is doing it proficiently. Otherwise, you're just leaving space open to get hit on, and it's just it's one of those games where it was bad from both teams in a lot of ways, and it was close in some regards, but we just weren't at it, and that is kind of the bad side of where this Watford team could be.
Yeah, like Jordan was talking about with the turnovers, you can see this screen grab. This was one against Stoke, and you can see the position of Ken Sema, who's inverted and really central to the pitch. We lose it quite cheaply in the middle, and one pass, and it's 2-on-2. Those Stoke players against Hoot and Porteous, and I think this is what led to the goal. And I even looked at Coventry game as well, where you had kind of the risk and reward that we've been talking about. The risk, I'll start with the reward actually, because it was earlier. Ken Sema in that inverted left back position, he sprays a lovely ball out to Tom Ince, who leads to the first goal. But for the third goal, you look at Ken Sema, who's high up the pitch. Bio does a really sloppy ball out that gets to a throw, and they do a quick throw. Hoot goes and presses, doesn't win anything, and then it's Porto versus Hadji Wright, and we all know what happens there. So it's that risk and reward. Those turnovers are a big kind of thing we need to look out. We need to get used to this season. We're going to have to see some heroics from Hoot, Porto, and Dan Batman, but let's see how it goes.
Just to flip it, we've kind of looked at the positives, the negatives. One standout thing, just going back to what the fans at West Brom and Barnsley said, and we've obviously found out at Watford, Charlie, is the 3 early substitutions. Now, we spoke to those guys, and they said about in 60 minutes, he changes the front line. It's been a little bit different with us in the sense that I'd say on the whole, there's been more of a high percentage of attacking substitutions, I would say. Most of the time, it's 2 midfielders and 1 attacker, or 2 wingers and 1 midfielder. Advantages, disadvantages of those substitutions, your view, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm a bit torn, to be honest. I feel like every time we've made the chances, I've never seen us regress or become worse. And I think every time we have made chances, there's been a bit of a lift, not a massive one. Individuals have done okay, not like all 3 completely changing the game. So I'm a bit torn. Some of me thinks I like it. It keeps the squad all engaged, everyone on their toes, everyone part of it, that culture that we've talked about for so much that we want to improve. So I like that bit. I think it's helped us during games. But there's a part of me that all the stuff we've talked about in terms of the shape and the identity, a part of me thinks, does that kind of go out the window when we make these changes, when different personnel and we're chasing the game? I don't think I've seen, apart from QPR, when we were in complete control, where we've kept our shape and our identity and our playing style for a whole 90 minutes. And I think with those changes, we kind of lose a bit of that. I'm completely torn. It'd be interesting to see what people think in the comments, if people like it or not. I don't know, Jacob, do you like it? Or are you having it?
For me, I like a proactive head coach and someone trying to implement and change the game. I think there's certain times in a match where I feel it's appropriate. I think especially when we're chasing the game. I think it's obviously it makes total sense. The only worry I do have with it is if we don't time it correctly. If you do it too early and it becomes a little bit like a last 10 minutes of a game at the 55th minute, I mean, that's when you lose control and we're losing what we're trying to do. I think what you said, Charlie, about sort of the tactical element of it in terms of it does rely on the players who come on to know exactly what they're trying to do, whether Val then adapts what he's asking of the players based on the match situation, or whether he continues with what he spoke to them before the game about what they're being asked to do is an interesting one. I'm a fan of it. Look, if a head coach is trying to influence the game, I'm all for it, because I think we've had plenty of managers in the past who've been very, very keen just to let it go and let the game go pie. And I'd much rather lose the game with a manager trying to actually influence and change the game rather than a manager who's just going to let a result go by. Jordan, from your point of view, have you seen it before? This sort of thing?
I mean, I think with a team that does require a lot of energy off the ball, I think it's not abnormal to do so. And I'm trying to think. There's not been too many. We don't really change shape very much. I know against Coventry we changed the back three and had a bit of a different look. But most of the time it's to give a little tweak. Maybe bringing on a more offensive number 8. We've seen likes of Asprilla come on and Tomins come on. They've been mainly positive changes. I don't think there have been too many that I've felt were a bad choice at the time. For the most part, I think it's been relatively kind of consistent in terms of approach. We're not really bringing too many players on to try and consolidate and close games off, which maybe you could argue would be a negative if we don't do so at certain points. But so far, no, I think it's been fine. And I think, as you mentioned there at the beginning, having given that kind of motivation to players too, you might not be starting today, but there's a good chance you're getting a good few minutes. That's useful to have, and it does keep things a little fresh. I don't mind it, to be honest with you. At this point, obviously, it might change as things go on. But for the most part, more frustration we've had over the years has been with lack of change, lack of use of substitutes, and we're using them more than we have done previously, and with arguably a weaker bench than we've had. So right now, I'm for it. Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, it's a really good point actually about the options we have off the bench. Because as I say, not compared to previous seasons, but I think particularly last season there were times you looked at the options off the bench, you thought none of these players are really going to be match winners or change the game. But even someone like Chatford who's come on and looked bright, I think he can influence the game. And we've got options in a lot of positions. I think just to wrap it up, I feel like we've covered quite a lot of this video. And shout out to Jordan for coming with all the stats and analysis. Charlie, I just wanted to ask you. Before I head over to Jordan, just to wrap up, how do you see this style evolving? I know it's very much a prediction. It's hard to tell. Do you think Val will just keep trying to drill in the same sort of style of play? Could you see him tweaking some parts of it, or are there parts of it that you think need tweaking slightly?
I'm not sure. That's probably a question better suited for Jordan, but I just think, like Jordan mentioned, this is a project. It's not a one-window project. I think that the elephant in the room is about we're all invested in this new system and identity, but it needs to get time. And it's going to be interesting if we lose 3 on the bounce, because I think we will. And we just need Gino to hold his nerve. And if we do get Val for 3 windows, which would be very rare for any Watford manager to get that length of time, and you can slowly see him making changes, bringing in players in different positions. Would he bring in a different number 6, like Jordan mentioned? Could we change the goalkeeper? Maybe a different number 10 instead of Tom Daly. I don't know, but I'm not too sure about evolution. It'd be interesting. We were talking about the substitutions just then. Interesting to see how often we see Bayo and Rajovic on the pitch together and having those 2 up front, which got us a goal in the end. So that's going to be interesting in terms of when we're chasing games, if Val's going to be doing that. I think personally this season there's going to be a lot of mistakes. I think there's going to be defeats, but I think we're going to win some games, and I think we're going to do it in style. I think we're going to be absolutely mid-table, but if we can get Val another January to see more progression, get him have another summer, and then next season we're looking like Val-Ball 2.0 is even better than it was from the start, then I think we'd all be happy.
We'll come back to this in a year time and do Val-Ball 3.0. But Jordan, I just wanted to ask, mate, final thoughts just in terms of where you see Watford going at the moment, just sort of thoughts, not only just in terms of the points, but actually the style of play and how you see it evolving.
Yeah, I think, and as you mentioned there, the elephant in the room, like the question is, do we have the stomach for it? And I think if Ismaël feels that he has the freedom to not go into a game with them, sounds weird, but not having the main focus to like, how do you get 3 points out of this game? How do you develop the squad, the style of play? You know, this is a multi-year thing. If you, in an ideal world, I'm sure he'd want to have that time. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that he does. Then yeah, you want to continue sticking with it. And we've seen that already. You know, we talk about Dan Back when we talk about these things that aren't perfect, but we're still continuing to kind of go through that. It's not for the progression necessarily of the individual. It's for, you know, if you continue doing that with Backman, you're essentially continuing to do that with the centre backs as well. And you're finding that way to kind of slowly progress. And, you know, again, as Charlie mentioned there, you can make those changes in the windows, and then hopefully you're looking at 2 or 3 seasons, you're in a position where you start to accumulate a squad that can really put together and do what you want to do. So I would say if we can do that, then expect. Sorry, my dog's making a lot of noise there.
He's getting twitchy already about Val.
She's not in for this conversation. Yeah, you can expect mistakes, you can expect issues for sure. But if you're seeing that incremental improvement, you're starting to see some understanding from the squad, which I think we've seen to a relatively good level so far this early on. I think it's easy to forget how disjointed and how fragmented things looked just a few months ago. You know, the last couple of games of the season, it wasn't good. And to see us at least take on a different style of play, a different philosophy, and feel like players are understanding their roles and their responsibilities is a real plus. So if you can continue to do that throughout the course of the season, then, you know, we'll feel a lot different about some of these results. I think you take losses a bit better, and you kind of also can enjoy those wins in a different way too. And I think right now we have to try and stay a little bit even keel. You know, don't take the losses too badly, and also don't take the wins too highly either, and just try and see how it goes at this stage. I wouldn't want to write off the season and say we couldn't do anything, you know, playoff wise, or couldn't kind of achieve something like that. You know, 5 games in, it'd be depressing to completely do so. But I'm looking at this personally as, are you building the foundation for something that could be a team that could challenge the league kind of in seasons to come? If something happens before that, then great. But right now, I think we're kind of at that stage where it's building something, hopefully over the next couple of seasons.
Great way to wrap it up. Jordan, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on, mate. Your insight, your expertise, really do appreciate it. And as I said at the top of the show, all the links in the description to Jordan's stuff at Watford Analytics on Twitter, one of the best Watford accounts around. Jordan, what a man. Charlie, pleasure as always. And thank you to all of you that watch. We really, really do appreciate it. As we mentioned, this was brought to you by Mad Squirrel, so please do make sure you go and check those guys out. Amazing work they do. And if you did enjoy the video, please do leave a like, subscribe down below for more of this type of content. You can follow us on socials at WD18fans, and we'll see you very, very soon.